What I'll be talking about is research that we've conducted in the first half of 2014 against a data set of about 60 companies, all of whom were birthed in California, in Silicon Valley. And collectively, this set of companies, since 2004, has evolved to be about $250 billion in market value. One of the criteria for looking at these companies is that they must have a market value or market cap of at least $1 billion. So what we're talking about here is a new set of players in the ecosystem, and the name that's come up is this idea of unicorns. And it came out of a startup VC environment where startups scale very fast to reach that $1 billion mark. So that's why they came up with this name of unicorns. And really the sort of exemplar or the particular case that got everybody to pay attention to unicorns was a transaction by Facebook in acquiring WhatsApp, which is a company of 50 people that was able to build a user base of 450 million users and get an exit in the form of a takeover by Facebook of $19 billion. So one of the things that happens when you see something like that is people start to rethink what in fact is driving valuations like that. People have been asking, is this a fluke? Is there something I'm missing here? How can a company like Snapchat, which has got no revenue, be worth $10 billion? The conclusion that we've come to is that this is not a fluke, this is not a bubble, this is the new reality, this is the new normal. As my friends at Sogeti say, disruption is the new normal. So really we look at this as sort of the third wave of the digital economy. The first wave being the original incumbents, the second wave being the internet giants like Amazon and Google and Facebook, and this new wave of companies like Uber, like Airbnb, the shared economy, that present very differently to those two other classes. So incumbents look at these companies and they say, I don't understand what's happening here. Giants like Facebook, like Google, have a very different point of view and look at these companies as adjacencies and opportunities to enter new markets very quickly. So from a Facebook point of view, $19 billion for 450 million users, that is shifting the trillion-dollar telecom business away from SMS to over-the-top messaging makes perfect sense. So one of the things that we need to really be more mindful of is how we look at these valuations. Disruption is now a pretty overused term, and we actually are starting to look at different ways to sort of express what's going on here, this dynamic. But clearly, these are companies that are delivering a new kind of customer experience that very often impacts an existing way of doing things. When we look at the different categories of unicorns, and we've put them into different segments, the largest category is e-commerce. So the way people order things has shifted fundamentally from the old sort of Amazon web-centric view to a much more mobile-centric view. And there was a great talk by Forrester here at the Design2Disrupt event about how mobile changes everything. And the presenter from Forrester talks about the mobile moment. And that mobile moment could be, hey, I need to get across town, I have a smartphone, I have an Uber app or a Lyft app, and I can just get a car here in 3 minutes. Because that car is connected to me via the cloud, and that driver has a smartphone as well. So these are companies that are disrupting a normal way of doing things, but by capitalizing on the fact that now everybody has a smartphone and an app. One pattern that we do see over and over again is that these unicorns have focused very, very strongly on a specific experience and are using analytics to perfect that experience to the point where it can be a one-click or a zero-click experience. And again, the Forrester presenter talked about this in terms of the mobile moment. Analytics are key to the value of these companies. And one of the really interesting aspects of this new wave of companies is that they're not only analytics driven, but these are new analytics. These are new metrics, and they're not KPIs that are easily understood by incumbents or existing competitors. So whoever has that data, whoever has and understands those analytics, learns much more quickly and can execute much more quickly. So this is where the unicorns and the platform economy really go hand in hand. And John Hagel, who's quoted extensively in the new report from Sogeti, talks about scalable learning trumping or being more valuable than scalable efficiencies. So many existing companies sort of focus on driving costs out of the organization and just being more efficient at doing one thing over and over again. Whereas what's really valuable here is learning customer behavior. And that happens with deep analytics and optimizing and iterating the experience based on those analytics. So one thing you can say about the disruptive impact of these unicorns is that they're scalable learning platforms, and they learn faster and they explore that new territory in a very aggressive way. Now, if I could use that to bridge to another topic, which is who do they share those learnings with? And typically, the old model is I'm a startup, I take a certain amount of investment capital, the minimum amount I need to continue to grow, and then I go public or I get acquired. So those have been the sort of canonical exits for Silicon Valley for decades now. What we're seeing now is companies are no longer going public as quickly as they used to. And they're actually staying private longer than they usually do. So from an investment point of view, what this means is that in the first half of 2014, we have seen more valuations of $1 billion or more than we have in an entire year in preceding years. So companies are staying private longer, they're explaining the dynamics of their learnings to a private investment audience, and they're taking more money. They're taking more money aggressively, so we're seeing more and more funding rounds of $100 million plus. Used to be, if you took $100 million in VC funding, it'd be like, what are you thinking? You're diluting your company. You should be much more conservative and wait for the big payoff of the IPO. That's no longer the model. The model now is I'm going to take a lot of private money, I'm going to drive that valuation, and I'm going to become an Airbnb or Snapchat. I'm going to be a $10 billion company without ever having gone IPO. This is fundamentally new. The advantages of being a public company are not growing. So what we're finding is that companies can do more faster as a private company. And I think if you look at a company like Uber or Airbnb, companies that are really disrupting not just industries, but regulatory regimes and entire established business models, and established models of customer relationships, if you put all of those risk factors in a SEC filing for an IPO, most investors will look at it and say, this is crazy, this is way too risky. So there's actually this dynamic of the more innovation and more disruption, the less intelligible or palatable to a general investment climate. So we're seeing private investors really feast on this opportunity because they're inside, they're getting the analytics, the new KPIs that pertain to this disruptive models. I think this is impossible. So when we talk about this idea of disruption, there is this sort of idea that the incumbent is under attack and must somehow create a defensive strategy. We feel that this is missing the point. And what we talk about in our study on unicorns is this idea of adjacencies. And adjacencies are basically next to the core business of the company. Now, if you're an incumbent and you're a phone company, or you're a hotel chain, or you're a travel company, you have a core business and you've been focused on optimizing and investing in that core business. What we're seeing is that Google will go and buy a Nest, which is a startup that produces a really fabulous home energy management, product, and that really has not a direct connection to search. It certainly doesn't have any direct connection to AdWords, which is a core cash cow for Google. But Google sees that as an adjacent market, a market that it can buy into for $3 billion. One of the things that we deduce from this dynamic is that the price of an adjacency is at least $1 billion. So if you want to catch a hold of a unicorn, you're looking at a minimum of $1 billion in terms of an acquisition. Not every incumbent has that kind of money to throw around. So what I'd like you to do now is ask about if it's not a defensive model, then what can established companies do?
Nice one. So,
rather than think defensively, we should be thinking opportunistically about doing what the unicorns are doing, and that is learning at scale. So any incumbent has this challenge of learning faster and better. And one of the things that we're very focused on at Orange Silicon Valley, which is where I work, is following the accelerator model. Now, in the last year or so, corporate accelerators, the idea of a engagement platform with startups has become very, very popular. We've explored this model. We've actually explored it pretty aggressively. And what we find is that a well-run corporate accelerator can expose you to several hundred startups in a given 12-month cycle. And out of that journey and those conversations with those startups, a lot of learning occurs. And so we see accelerators as a low-cost, very efficient way for incumbents to ramp up their learning abilities in terms of new business models and new experiences. Does that mean they're going to find the next unicorn and participate in that and have this very nice exit, or at least a piece of a multi-billion-dollar company? Maybe, maybe not. Our point of view is that apart from the financial return, that organizational asset that gets built in terms of scalable learning, engagement with the ecosystem, and rebuilding that every time you have a new cycle in the accelerator is extremely interesting and extremely valuable. Orange Institute is a think tank that was sponsored by the Executive Committee of Orange starting in 2009. It's focused on the digital economy on a multidisciplinary level. and it's basically rooted in 2 intensive immersions each year in the creative tech capitals of the world. Cities like Tel Aviv, Tokyo, Seoul, Silicon Valley, of course, and increasingly New York. New York's become a very important tech center in the last few years. Orange Institute is a way not just to talk to startups, but to connect the dots in the digital economy that collectively, when you connect all these dots, you start to see the trends that are going to impact the organization. So it's another way to learn collaboratively, since each session is attended by the member companies, of which Sogeti is one. And it's over the last 12 sessions that we've done since 2009, we're seeing recurring patterns, and many of them are design-led. So design, I think, is a really good topic for the summit this year. I think it's very central to the key trends in the digital economy. So fields like Internet of Things or connected objects are essentially new experiences that are very, very design intensive. John Hagel talks, and he's talked at Orange Institute in the past, about the passionate individual and this idea of engagement, because that individual who is engaged and passionate about their work is going to create more value and becomes much more valuable to the organization that she works in. That the nature of that passionate individual involves a questing disposition, which means they're curious, they ask questions, and they connect with other people. This relates to another thought by John Hagel about flows and the idea of information flows as opposed to information silos. So the individual mandate, if you will, that comes out of this disruptive unicorn model is somebody who's willing to and very interested in sharing and in understanding new experiences. So when we look at the sharing economy, what we're finding is that it's starting in the consumer sector, but it's spreading to the enterprise. And we've all talked in the last few years about the consumerization of IT, and by extension, the consumerization of the enterprise. So what does a consumerized enterprise look like? Who are the people that work in the consumerized enterprise? Those are people that have a greater sense of autonomy and are willing to share, not only with individuals in their own organization, but with other organizations as well. So when we think about this kind of new model of the individual, we have to be mindful of the fact that the enterprise in the next 5 years or so will be taken over by the millennial generation. And one of the areas of research that I'm very focused on right now is the implications of a millennial organization, whether that's a disruptive unicorn or an established incumbent, because the incumbents will also have to succumb to the millennial generation. So when we look at how millennials experience something like customer care, customer service, they've grown up with a smartphone in their pocket. They're not going to call a contact center to ask for help. They're going to go to their smartphone and type in something into Google and get the answer, or a self-service app. So this idea of what can the individual do, I think is a really great question, and I think it needs to be considered in the context of how millennials who are digital natives do things differently. And what we know already is that they bring their own device to work, and increasingly they'll bring their own data. A lot of these aspects really come down to something that we're starting to see in the newspaper every day, and that is the restructuring of not just the entire IT industry, but the way we work as well. And so you're starting to see companies like HP really just break up themselves to restructure and move away from business models that have become commoditized and no longer generating significant value. I think that restructuring is occurring all the way up the stack from computer hardware to the people that show up for work every day. And we've talked about the millennial generation taking over the enterprise, and I think that's part of the restructuring as well. The goal of all of this should be to accelerate learning and adaptation, and I think that I have a lot of hope. There's a lot of angst about what's happening in terms of disruption, and disruption still connotes for many people a sense of dread or destruction. But from our point of view, it's an incredibly exciting time because it does mean that we're moving to a model where people will be learning constantly all the time, and that the individual in the organization that does that will have a greater impact on the organization. So we're super optimistic about what's going on.